Hey everyone, it's Emily Fox. Today's video is going to be about book recommendations with a twist to it. Recently I did a video where I recommended some exceptions to tropes I personally really don't like, and I asked you in the comment section to leave me some of the tropes you personally don't care for so I could try to find some book recommendations based on that. So basically offering some suggestions as a possible exception. Am I going to change your mind completely? Probably not, but is it fun to try? Absolutely. So let's get to it. To be honest, I agree with most of you, so I had to think really hard about books that I think did it well. So for example, enemies to lovers is a trope that a lot of you dislike. Personally, I feel like it worked well for me in romance, like fantasy romance. I'm not a big romance person at all, but usually that trope I thought worked better for me. But after reading a lot of really popular ones like the Honeymooners and Hating Game, I realized that maybe not. But I have one author to recommend to you as an exception, and it is Emily Henry. I'm not sure right now where her books are because you can tell a little bit chaotic here, but I read 2 books by her, loved both of them. Both of them have the enemies to lovers trope and loved it so much. The first one is Book Lovers, her most recent book, and you follow the main character who was always the woman men left to find their perfect wife, and she was like a workaholic, she didn't want children, and they always marry that woman from a little town that has like a, I don't know, Christmas tree business, you know what I mean? Very Hallmark movie type. And she goes on a trip with her sister. She's pregnant with her 3rd baby, so it's like their last big trip. And what I liked is that, yes, there's the whole enemies to lovers with the main interest, but the author in general tends to use great side characters that are complex and interesting. The whole book is not just about the romance. I feel like the romance does make sense. It's very mature, and there's no big like miscommunication in general. It was the same thing with Beach Reads, which I don't know if it's my favorite. I can't choose. This one contains a lot about grief. So main character, her whole world was shattered whenever her dad passed away because she learned that he was cheating on her mother, and she had always thought that they had the perfect relationship. She's a huge romantic, and then she goes to this cottage that he used to share with the mistress, and she has to write a book. She has like a big timeline, and then the neighbor. In both cases, I feel like the men might have appeared like emotionally unavailable, but they're still very emotionally mature, and I feel like it changes the game completely for me. I feel like if more romance books were written this way, I think I would call myself a romance reader. I really enjoyed both of them. And like I said, I feel like they played the whole enemies to lovers trope really, really well because it makes sense. Like it's not based on like random things that they hate each other. It doesn't stay for way too long. There's no big miscommunication like I was saying. And in general, I just think it's really well done. So if you have pretty much given up on the whole enemies to lovers, try Emily Henry. Just give her one more shot. I actually have her other book, People We Meet on Vacation. I think it's Friends to Lovers, which I have to try because I personally don't care for that trope because usually it's like a love triangle also, and it's usually like the sexy new man with an accent with the best friend who was in the friend zone. I hate that trope. So I'm gonna give her another shot and hopefully she changes my mind about that too, but try it. Another one that you guys hate apparently is an ending that came out of nowhere, which I agree. Recently was really mad at the new Riley Sager book, The House Across the Lake. Really not a fan. I had a lot of issues with it, but that would describe the ending for me. But that one time it worked for me, and like it is a huge exception, is Behind Her Eyes, which I know everyone seems to hate that book. And in theory, it should not have worked for me because you're following a single mother who's clearly an alcoholic, and like the kid just disappears conveniently throughout the whole thing. There's a whole cheating husband. None of it should have worked, but somehow it worked. Definitely, I needed to mention it. Come on. You will probably not like it if you don't like random endings, but somehow it worked for me, so I'm throwing it out there. A big one that I do agree normally with is a character that comes back to life, which, yes, I agree. I think one good exception that is well known, I don't think this is really a spoiler at this point, but Lord of the Rings. If you don't want to hear it, skip. But I feel like we all know about Gandalf dying and then coming back. Listen, that one time, I'm totally okay with it. Absolutely okay with it. Generally speaking, not a fan, but I was so glad he came back because Gandalf. But yes, I do think it worked really well in that case. However, I want to mention a spoiler about Six of Crows, the duology that is now being set as a trilogy. The 3rd book is supposed to come out. So if you don't want to know anything about the spoiler for the 2nd book, I'll put spoiler on the screen, skip ahead, but I need to rent because in the second book, I hated how Matthias dies like randomly at the end. It feels very random, like last minute decision. The author just realized, oh, it was supposed to be hard. Someone must die. There you go, Matthias, you're dead. I am calling it out that book 3 is coming back. And I hate it because we're including in here. Also not a fan of that trope, but I'm calling it out. He's coming back and I'm not happy about it. But Gandalf was okay. Gandalf was okay. A few people mentioned the way male authors write female characters specifically, and no shock here, I am also not a fan of how a lot of them seem to badly write female characters. Like, they could be a sexy lamp. Like, no, it doesn't work. I mean, just recently, I reviewed this book and I had to put it down because of a lot of stuff that happens that is really problematic with female characters. But I wanted to suggest The Thousand Splendid Suns by Kelly Rossini. In general, the author writes fantastic female characters. I'm just always really impressed. And this one specifically, you're following mainly female characters, and he does such a good job. Obviously, very difficult topics like violence, domestic violence, the war, but his female characters are so well written. And he has a couple quotes, which let me put a few on the screen. There's the one about like the womb of the mother, and like there's another one about the compass, like a compass that points north. A man's accusing finger always finds a woman. He just does such a great job. Obviously not just these quotes, but in general the author is super quotable. But in general, I do think he does a fantastic job writing complex, interesting female character that is credible. I've heard really great things about Terry Pratchett as an author that writes decent female characters, which I would love to hear your thoughts, because I've only read like Good Omens, which he co-wrote. So I don't know how, and I mean, you were following 2 main characters that were men. So I can't tell yet, but I have a couple of his books from, I don't remember the name, something World, by him on my shelf somewhere. I was wondering if I could just find one. No. Like there's one about witches, there's also the one that follows death, and like you can supposedly start pretty much anywhere, but not really. I have a couple of his books, like I said, so I will be giving him a shot eventually, and I'm curious to see how I will feel about him, but apparently he does a great job too, so I'm curious to add that to my TBR. Ooh, okay, one that a lot of you feel like is overdone, and I agree, is the whole like orphan, thief, cold-hearted person, like them against the whole society, which I do think it's a very common trope in fantasy. And sometimes I'm like, oh, okay, another thief, another orphan. So yeah, I feel you. However, Mistborn, I mean, Brandy Sandy, he can write pretty much anything adult and I will read it. So good. I feel like it did play really well with the whole like me against the whole universe. I do feel like the whole heist in general, I feel like is way overdone in fantasy, but it makes sense. And I do think it's done really well. Throwing the whole empire seems like a big feat from a group of little thief, but that time it's done really well. It's not the only time, but it's definitely a classic. And I needed to throw it out there. If you haven't tried it, give it a shot because it might change your mind. Speaking of Brandy Sandy, I also wanted to throw out there the whole like too many point of views, which a lot of people also mentioned. I hadn't noticed how annoying I found that until recently. I feel like I've been seeing it more and more often, and it now bugs me because it feels like out of breath. Like you're reading, it's like too many stories that are not important. It's not improving the book. I don't want it. But The Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson definitely would be an exception if you can power through 1,000 pages books, but they're so good. And I do think the second book, people did think there were too many point of views, but I don't care. The world building, the magic system is just so fascinating to me. You're not going to binge read it. I mean, I'm sure some people do, but like to me, I try to like read about 100 pages a day or something. And I feel like I can do that with his books, and it's just, I'm savoring it and it's perfectly okay. So yes, a lot of point of views, I agree, but I do think that eventually will absolutely pay off. I mean, it did already for me, second book, but eventually I'm sure everything converged towards the end as it usually does, and it's going to be worth it. So try it, maybe. Okay, a lot of you hate love triangles, which Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. The one time I remember thinking it was fun, it's been a while, so I don't know how I would feel about it nowadays, but The Kiss of Deception, which is a YA fantasy, so like be prepared, it's YA. But I thought it was such a fun premise, and it also has like the small town vibes for a while, which I'm also a huge fan of, so it worked for me. You follow main character, and she's forced to marry a prince from another kingdom to bring peace, and the day of her wedding she just escapes, she runs away, and then two men go after her, the men she was supposed to marry, and then an assassin is sent to kill her, and you don't know who is who throughout the book, so it's kind of a love triangle, and I liked it, so guilty. But I think it's worth a shot if you are into YA fantasy. Like I said, it's been a couple years. I would be curious to see how I would feel about it nowadays, but it was a lot of fun, and I feel like it starts that way, but then book 2 and 3, yes, there's still the love triangle, but it becomes a lot more like political intrigue, like a huge war between the kingdoms. So it becomes more and more, even though it starts kind of romancy, but I liked it. I liked it. Okay, the last one is a spoiler, so I have to mention the book before the trope. So the Puppy War trilogy, you have to have read the whole trilogy. Otherwise, I will be spoiling the ending, which don't want to do that. So if you don't want to see me spoil that, I'll put on the screen a little thing sending you back to the other version where I mentioned the ones I don't like and some exceptions. But for anyone that wants to say, spoiler, it's a common trope in books to have the main character either lose all their powers or die in order to save the world. It's usually not something I care for. Actually, let's talk about quickly The Hunger Games, which, spoiler once again for the end of the book. Katniss doesn't die, but she decides to have children, which I hate. Not because she decided to have children per se. It's like she wanted children deep down, but she didn't want to until she felt safe, and she decided to do it anyway, even though she wasn't safe, and I feel like it's so out of character, and I resent it. To me, that feels like losing your power. I don't know. But to go back to the Puppy War, the main character dies, and I feel like usually I would have hated that, but it just works so well for the series. I do think, I mean, reading it, I wasn't happy. Broke my heart completely. I wasn't really expecting it. I didn't think the author would go there, which I don't know why, because after reading the first book, I should have known she would go as far as it needs to go. But I think it was the right ending. It was painful. It was very painful, but I think it was the right ending. So I would highly recommend it, but I mean, if you're watching this, you've probably read it already, but you might agree with me. Let me know in the comment section. So do you agree with my exceptions? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comment section. Or if you have any of the tropes that you personally don't care for that you would like me to try to recommend you, one that might change your mind, I will be linking part 1 on the screen. That way you can check it out if you haven't. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I will be seeing you in my next video. Bye.